Hi, I'm Ivy Cohn, and sitting with me in conversation today is David Kyle. He's an author and so much more, but his most recent book, Energy Teachings of the Three, Guidance and Practices to Open Your Heart and Heal Your Mind. David, it's so nice to see you.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you.
Well, it was a journey for you to get to the writing of this book. So perhaps you can give us a little bit of the journey itself.
Okay. So in shamanic tradition, very often around the age of 7 or so, particularly in the high Andes Mountains, because my tradition now is in the Andean healing traditions, that if a child is out tending the llamas and is struck by lightning, which is often the case, and lives, that they are presented with the opportunity to apprentice to a shaman. And in Peru, they're called pacos, which means sacred person. And my teacher, one of my teachers, actually both, but one of my teachers when he was 7, was hit by lightning. He was visiting his grandparents. He was living with his parents down in Cusco. And his grandfather was a well-known Paco. And so that was a sign that he should be trained in the shamanic traditions. I, at 7, had a similar kind of experience, although it wasn't lightning striking me. It was a different kind, and that's another story. But at that time, when I was coming out of a very painful situation, I was on my way to Sunday school in Portland, Oregon. And I can still remember the exact place on the street where it happened to me. And suddenly I stopped and everything opened up. There was this incredible light, this incredible sense of expansion. And I could have been there forever, and could only have been there for a moment. But everything changed in my life. And pictures of myself after that is I started to create Indian lore, and I would create all kinds of leather kinds of things for me. And whenever we played cowboys and Indians, I was always the Indian. And what that was, it was the beginning of my journey into shamanic traditions, and followed that along my life until the early 2000s. And I had worked with many traditions, but I hadn't found a home. And through, again, serendipity, which is a whole nother story, I entered into a training process in the Caro tradition of the Laika. These were ancestors of the priests of the Inca when the Spanish came through and they fled into the high mountains. And the Lama government, or the Peruvian government, didn't know they were there until 1958, when they came down from the mountains to give their prophecies. And one of my teachers, who was an anthropologist, was beginning to connect with one of these Pacos. And for some 20 years, he was trained in that tradition. And that was my early training. And then as I kept traveling to Peru, I found 2 teachers that I worked with. And one trip I would go down and be with one teacher, the next trip with the other, because in the shamanic tradition is that you're given a toolkit by apprenticing to different teachers so that you begin to gather how you want to begin to work. And then as you get your toolkit, then through the spirits that are guiding you, your own expression of that begins to come out. And so the basis of this book came in 2012. I was with one of my teachers, and for 3 weeks every day we would go out to some sacred site and he would initiate me, because each site had a certain frequency, a certain pattern that was to move into me. And the very last one, of the last day that I was going to be with him, he took me to the space-time cave. And we drove into a canyon. And when you get out of the car, it's probably close to 70 degrees of travel up the mountain. And way up the mountain, you see this huge triangular cave, but in front of it is rock. And so on this path that has been it was paved with these old blocks. Anthropologists said this cave has been used for over 10,000 years. And so we wind our way up, and as you come around the side of the rock to go into the cave, on the back side of the rock are carved 3 different seats into the rock. And it looks like a laser has cut them. It's so precise. And in the middle is the largest one, which is called the throne. And after a little bit of explaining the cave and the background, he said, sit down into this throne. Now, every time he would initiate me in some sacred site, he would do a number of ways of purifying me. And in Peru, the shamans use Florida water. And Florida water is, in South America, kind of what men put on their face. And it has a lot of alcohol in it. So when you spit it or spritz it, it sprays out and hits you. And so he took the Florida water out and sprit me in the forehead, in the heart, and in the belly, which is the traditional places of purification. And then he placed his hands on my head, as he had done so many times, and he began to speak in Quechua, the native language. Done that many times. And as soon as he stepped away, it was like electricity came right up my spine and out the top of my head. And it just stunned me. My eyes were still closed. And suddenly I saw before me 3 elongated beings, probably 8 feet tall. And they came forward and they touched my forehead, my heart, and my belly. And I knew it to be a blessing of some kind. And as they stepped away, then from the crown of my head, this electricity just went right through my body again. And I sat there stunned. And my teacher let me be there for a while. And then he said, I want you to go and sit up into the cave. And it was like I was in a different place, in a different kind of experience inside of myself. And so there was another student that was there with us, and he had been working with her. And then he came back to me and he just simply asked me how I was doing, and I was starting to regain some stability in my life. And I said, who are the elongated beings that I saw? Oh, he said, those are the Illuminarians. You saw them. Yes. Oh, so they initiated you. Now they are your teachers. I'm not your teacher any longer. Because when I was initiated here by them, my teacher told me that he was no longer my teacher. And so you're on your own with them. And I said, well, what do I do? And he said, that's for you to discover. And so that began my journey of trying to figure out how, if I'm to communicate or learn from them, how do I do that? And over several months, tried different things, tried to go into kind of trance and open, tried to speak out. Nothing seemed to happen until one morning, I had the idea, what if I just ask a question and write out a question and see what happens? I wrote the question out, and then it was though somebody was moving my hand and it was like automatic writing, and they begin to speak to me. And then over these next years, they begin to give me teachings. And this book represents the core of the teachings. They've given me many other things over the years. And they finally said a year and a half or so ago, now it's time for these teachings to go out in the world because of the conditions that's on the planet.
My goodness, what a journey.
Yeah, right.
And you must have had a small moment of when your teacher said, I'm no longer your teacher, of feeling a bit cut adrift.
Right. Yeah.
So in the process of once you established a way to communicate, that process brought you really the contents of this book.
Yes.
So you have, there's two sort of distinct blocks that are what I would call, and as you've called, tools that we can use. The 5 pillars and the 5 stones.
Right.
So perhaps you could give us a sense of what is so about those two, and then
Sure.
we can maybe talk, or you could share how one implements that, and also what are the principles behind those teachings.
Okay, good. So the process, as they begin to teach me, was to find the right questions, and what I discovered, the right questions were what was going on in my life and how do I expand and grow my own life. And so the first section in the book is called the 5 Pillars of Love. And what the 5 pillars are about is that they would give me one pillar. So the first pillar is appreciation. And they would give a little guidance in it of what is appreciation. And in many ways, different than what we've heard before. For example, their definition of appreciation is changing the focal length of our perception. Instead of perception being close in to us and therefore, in a sense, cut off from the world, appreciation opens and expands our perception of the world. And then it went on to talk about other kinds of things about perception. But the heart of each pillar is the notion of how do we increase through practice in a very practical way these kinds of conditions. So, for example, one of the practices in appreciation is simply going out and anything that you see, feel, taste, or sense, just acknowledge it with, oh, that cat who's stretching there, how beautiful you are. And so this is a practice of seeing outward and beginning to open our heart. And so one of the fundamental things that each section of the book and each chapter of the book deal with in terms of the practices is one or more of the chakras of our body. And so it's increasing, and often it's related to the harmonics between one chakra and then jumping over to the next chakra. And so the movement back and forth, action. So if you're working with your heart in your head, then what it begins to activate is the throat chakra. And in each practice, they're telling you what this is doing to open the capacity of the frequency of love. So in the pillars of love, it's really about learning to increase our frequency, increase the frequency by which we live and do and operate within the world. Now, they would give me one practice at a time, and I would work with that practice for often a week or 6 weeks, depending on how it began to move in me. And so what I learned over time, the key was that what is that experience in my body and through my relationship out into the world of how do I actually perceive, feel, act differently from my heart energy. So it's increasing that energy of love. That's why it's called the 5 pillars of love. So the pillars are appreciation, kindness, forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude. And they call gratitude, if you do nothing in your life but practice gratitude, it will transform you. It will increase the practice of the frequency of your life so that you operate in an entirely different way. And so each of these have very specific practices then in which we open. Forgiveness, for example, is unique. We say, oh, Ivy, I forgive you for what you did. What they say is they call our ego structure a tapestry. And the tapestry has all these threads in it. And the work of our life is to slowly pull the threads apart so that we come back to our original self. And so they're saying, in the ego sense, you don't know how to really forgive somebody because the ego is so entwined in the whole interaction that created the need to forgive. So what they say is bring the issues to your heart. So Ivy, you hurt me by something you said to me on the phone, and I thought we were friends, and now I feel just blown out. So it's not saying, I forgive you, because I don't know what that whole interchange was really about, but my ego reacted in some way. So it's to bring the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions to my heart, to my head, because that's where we get locked in through our thinking and our perceiving. And let the energy begin to build there. They say, let it become heavy energy, and then let it drop to your heart. And let that energy begin to be at work in the heart. And then say, love is my essence. All that I am is love. Now they said, you don't know what it is you ultimately need to forgive. But as you just bring to the heart and begin to actually feel the energetic sensations at the heart, something begins to fundamentally shift. Now, in that practice, I did that for several months until I actually could begin to feel what the release was. Because a secondary practice is bring it down, and then at the heart, bring it all the way up to the head and let it naturally release into the cosmos. So all these different practices are working with the energy, with the power of the energy. And so each practice, each particular pillar has one or more several practices that you work with over time.
I understand that from the book, which I have read, you start with those pillars of love and get that really firmly in place,
Right.
as the practices that they are, and then move on to the stones.
Right.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about,
Sure.
Moving into the stones.
Yeah. So the foundation stones for daily living are psycho-spiritual practices. They're really working with how the tapestry or the structure of our ego has to be grounded and released. So the pillars are about increasing the frequency of energy. The stones are about grounding that energy in our life. That's the fundamental distinction there. And so those practices, the first one is self-love. And part of what self-love is about is basically saying, it's not about me, it's about everything. So the simple practice that they have you do is, first of all, just 15, 20 minutes a day. If you're taking a walk, if you're sitting in your study or wherever you are, just see things and say, oh, that lamp, I am that. That plant over there, I am that. And do that for a few days and just do it regularly, because what you're doing, and as I've talked, as I've written and asked about some of this, is that it's changing the neuronal pathways in your brain. Then after a week or so, you go around, and instead of naming, I am that lamp, you just, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that. So just as you perceive or smell or feel, it's I am that. And the whole experience is to let you begin to expand, that you are not this isolated, separate self. You're everything. And again, we've heard about this in all kinds of spiritual traditions. And I've worked with many spiritual traditions, but this was the first time where I am that, after working it, that I really begin to feel the shift that begin to go on in my life. So that the connection to trees and plants and animals and the craftsmanship of things just begin to open up to me in an entirely different way. So self-love, humility, which is, people that read it just can't believe, because we have this notion of what humility is. And they take the notion of humility to a whole different kind of perception. And then self-love, humility. I just lost it here. Let me just get it. Went blank. So self-love, humility, self-acceptance. How do we accept ourselves? The difference between self-love and self-acceptance is fundamentally that self-love is expansion, self-acceptance is a contraction into that place within us that truly brings peace and compassion and openness to ourselves. So self-acceptance. And the exercise in there really opens that doorway for us. And then reflection, they talk about that in all the spiritual traditions in our world, there's contemplation, where we read something or we hear something and we take time to just connect with it and ruminate on it and open it. That's contemplation. Reflection is to go deeper, to take that into our psyches, not just our heads. And there's practices on self-reflection. And then the fifth one is changing the old patterns, not only of our life, but of society, our country, our world. And it's how we go back into the past and forward into the future. This is often a difficult one for people, because it really, you have to have pretty strong concentration. But going back into the past is what we call ancestral healing. And so there's a basic practice about knowing your ancestors, or if you don't, go back 175 years where the Industrial Revolution started, that brings us to this place. because in all Native traditions, we talk about 7 generations. And so 7 generations take us back to the mid 1800s, 1840s, 1850s. And that's when this acceleration to today happened. The point is that what happened then and the choices made then is the result of what's happening today. And then it's to go into the future, 175 years to roughly 2020 and 2220, sorry. And so how you move into the future, how you move into the past creates a process of surrender in your life. And the practices there open the doorway to the basic shamanic tradition of moving outside of time and space. And the second part of the initiation in that cave was to initiate me how you move outside of time and space. You look at any shamanic tradition, and the shaman had to be initiated into what's going to happen in the near future. Like the Lakota, they're getting hungry. And so the shaman looks into the future and says, oh, the bison will be there in 3 days at this place. We need to be there to get them. Now, if he's not really seeing that, he's not going to have a job after a while, because his care is for the community. And ultimately, all shamanic traditions are about the care for the community. They're a healing tradition. And so that was the second initiation in that cave, to open my perception both of the past and the future. And literally after he had initiated me, it was like I could see time spread out before me, and any place I put my attention visually, it just opened up what was there. And so it was looking way at the past, at the present, at the future. Now, I have to say that for me, when I came back, it was more difficult for me to do those, because in that cave, in that energy, that's its intent. But the practice of that last stone is really to be of service to the world. And that's what the practices there are about. So the principles in these first 2 sections are really about opening up and showing us how to increase our frequency of expansion into this place of love. And they use the chakra heart as the touchstone, but all the chakras get woven into increasing that frequency. It's to change the neuronal pathways of our brain. It's to change the way perception is really held. It's how we work and see energy in all kinds of things. So the principle of increasing frequency, they say over and over, that's what's needed at this time, for people to open that doorway much more fully into their life. The second thing is that the practices become the key. It's not information. And so, for example, people that read the book say, wow, the great book. And I ask, well, have you tried any of the practice? No, I really haven't. I think that, as the 3 say right at the end of the book, some of you will read this and say, well, that was another good thing that I read. Others will receive it and begin the practices of it. No one's at fault between practicing and not practicing. But they said that all over the world at this time, because of the conditions that we're in on the planet, teachings are similar to this, are coming all over the world through people. They come in different forms and in different ways. So if this doesn't appeal to you, if this doesn't resonate to you, then move on. Let the flow of life lead you to a teaching that actually begins to expand and open you at this time. So the process of being in touch with these teachings is really to deal with this tapestry, this ego structure that keeps us contained and contracted and separated from the world. And this, all that the practices are about is to open. They said every spiritual mystical tradition that has arose on your planet has been similar to what this is. It's been said in many different ways. This is just one way. It's come through your mind, through your experience, David, and through your languaging. And so some are going to respond to this and some aren't. But the fundamental thing is that anybody who reads the book, our presence is there. And if you begin to practice and ask for our support and help, we will be present with you because we are in a timeless state. We are everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So it creates an opportunity for people who feel drawn to it to actually begin to change their life.
Well, as you pointed out so well, this is another vehicle for timeless truths which have been presented down through the ages.
That's right.
And I for myself, in looking at what's happening on this planet right now, whatever the avenue is that works for an individual to be able to evolve themselves to a place where the various things that you've outlined here can be actualized in their life. And
Right.
it can, and that consistent presence can only be attained through diligent practice.
That's right.
It's not something that you do once and, oh, I'm there.
Right.
It becomes part of the warp and the woof of who you are. And that often very tangled ego tapestry that you so aptly call it gets in the way of that.
Right.
And it really, that breaking that apart is just critical. I just so commend you for bringing forward yet another way for people to engage with something that goes by many names.
Right.
I was quite struck as I read your book by how parallel to the book on quantum physics that I'm reading right now is.
Right.
And when you said the three are everywhere and nowhere, I mean, that is quantum right there.
Right.
And if humans can, in whatever time we may have left, because it's looking pretty gloomy out there, get to a place where we can move into that kind of awareness, it will truly be magnificent.
Right.
So David, do you have anything else you'd like to add to this?
Well,
just within the context of where we are in the planetary predicament.
Yeah. Well, these first two sections, or two parts with the different sections in them that we've talked about, there is a third part that they gave me when they said, now is the time for this to be published, but we have something more to give for this book. And this third part is called the challenge, which they call the challenge for the end times. And they're saying we're in the end times. And so they go through 4 sections here. And the first section just lays out, which anybody that's aware knows, that the environmental situation is dire, that the political and situation of control over people and dominance and all those things, and the big disparity between poor people and people of wealth, they say, you all know this. That's present for you. But that there are some things that nobody is really talking about that could have dire effects beyond the situation with the environment that is moving so quickly toward collapse. They said that civilization itself is in a process of collapsing. It's breaking down at so many levels. But there's this gulf that's growing between a group of people who want to maintain control that create a negative way of being in the world, and those who are struggling simply, is there another way? And, you know, the New Age thing that's gone on for some 40 years is simply a hint at what's needed from what not only the three are saying, but so many others are saying. And so the first section is to say the exercises are, let's look at your fears. What is it that opens up in you when you actually begin to see and look at this in terms of your children or your grandchildren? You know, you don't want this to happen. What is it that is going on for you? So there's, in the first section, as they lay out this, you know, we have to confront our own fears and our own uncertainties and our own challenges of, you know, just like with the pandemic, we want it to go back to normal, and it will never go back to normal. It's the illusion, oh yeah, we don't wear masks and we have our shots and all this and everything will be okay. And everything won't be okay. We know that, but we don't want to address it. So they begin to address that. As an aside, I was with my teacher when I had this experience with the three in October of 2012. And so, you know, there was this whole thing about December of 2012, there's this big thing that's going to happen that's going to change the world and all that. And my teacher and other Pacos were hearing Westerners talk about this. And so they came together in an enclave and they said, let's look into the future. And so they looked at 2012 and they said, yeah, it's the 26-year cycle coming back around from the galaxy that we're passing through, and another age will begin. But it's not describing what they seem to be implying here. So they looked further and they said, in 2016 is the beginning of a huge change on the planet. A negative force starts to grow all over the world, and it will grow strongly in North America. And then they said, let's look farther. And they said, 2020, the whole world will begin to go in a huge change that will affect and kill many people. And it's the beginning of the true breakdown in the environment, that you'll see huge environmental shifts of earthquakes and floods and fires and all of that, that will go until 2025. And it will increasingly get worse over those years. And the breakdown will get stronger and stronger. And there'll be migrations, and there'll be people who will die of all kinds of diseases. And they said, if you look at this, it will look tremendously negative. But their whole intent is that the human race at this time has an opportunity to take another step in evolution of what the three call the truly human. And they say that that is possible, but for transformation to happen, you have to have a strong negative with a growing positive, because it's in that tension that something actually shifts. Now, they clearly say the challenge is on the positive side right now. Will enough people begin to expand and open themselves and increase their frequency so that they can get to a place of this positive counterpoint? And they said, during this 5 years, more and more people will begin to open to all kinds of capacities and characteristics and qualities the few people have seen over the millennial. And these will be teachers moving around, helping people to open more, to open more. And if there is enough, the chance of breaking through is going to be possible. It's probable right now. Will it be possible? Depends on our awakening. The negative is what begins to help the awakening in people to actually happen. Now, the other things that they talk about is you have to develop resonance in you so that one of the practices, identify groups that you're already in. If you're not in a group now in some fashion, look to a group that you can explore. When you go to the groups you're already in, is there really heart resonance? And they give you a practice how to really, if you worked with the first two sections, your heart resonance has already begun to expand and grow. But this is then a practice to have like a radar to say, do you really resonate here? It also says, is this a situation that I need or want to be in? And so you begin to ask questions in the group that you're part of to say, do I make a choice to stay or go? Do I make a choice to have a conversation with the group about some of the things I'm feeling or not? And they give you several things to begin to say, as we go forward, things are going to get more difficult. And if you don't have resonance, you go blind in those situations. You have to be able to have your radar very strong and be willing to make choices. The following chapter then is about how do you really increase the capacity of energy in a group environment. Now, this is a precursor to what they say is going to happen for a lot of people. That cities are going to be very difficult to live in as things break down, as just like what we're seeing, all the floods, all the fires that are going through and eating up towns and villages. People are going to be moving around, they're going to be uncertain, and there's going to be marauders coming out of the big cities because there will be less food. How are you going to be able to survive and thrive? And so they talk about there is in the near future the situation where many of you will have to live in small communities together. And they talk about what those conditions need to be. And the prime thing is that women need to be the counsel that helps control, run, envision how that community needs to operate and work. Because the male energy that has dominated the planet over the last 3,000 years has been the contributor to much that are being felt right now. And so they lay out, how do you begin to evolve a living community that both helps you survive and to thrive? And so they are very clear that most people are frightened to look at what lies ahead. And so they're just giving very practical things for people who are willing to begin to be aware of this within their own lives, in their own communities, their families. How do we begin to actually prepare? And they said, some of you will make decisions to actually move now because you realize that in this environment that you may be living in may not be the best place for you to be. And they give cautionary things of how you evaluate with your family. If you, just because you've gotten the idea, the rest of your family may not. So how do you work with those things? And how do you make choices? Because fundamentally what they're saying is this third part is that you're going to be confronted with all kinds of choices. So Ivy, you and I aren't probably going to see the place where there's the huge collapse, but that's not too far away from many, many people that are in their early 30s and 40s that will begin to live through some of those very dire times. So the three are saying this information is coming out all over the world. How do you prepare for this? Because the collapse is a rebalancing of the planet, is what they're saying.
Well, David, thank you so much. I believe the book that you have published this year is a huge benefit to this process,
Thank you.
alongside many other great traditions, and certainly applicable to the times that we're in. These are unprecedented times, and
That's right.
it will require those of us who have any interest in rising to the occasion to rise so far beyond what we thought we were going to have to.
That's right. That's right.
So energy teachings of the three, guidance and practices to open your heart and heal your mind. I hope you have many, many people who get the benefit of this. Thank you so much, David, for joining me in a conversation today.
Thank you, Ivy. I really appreciate it. Thank you.